Again, thank you for joining us all for this webinar, Energy Justice, Protect Your Electric Account. I'll be your presenter this evening. As I said, my name is Aidan Smith. I'm an outreach coordinator with the City of Boston, and this webinar is coming to you from the Office of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. So here's an outline of the evening's webinar. With a webinar title like Protect Your Electric Account, the first question we need to ask is, why does my electric account need to be protected in the first place? From what and from whom? So that's where we will begin by framing the problem. Then I'll move into how to protect yourself and your electric account. I'll provide some tips and suggestions and also mention a few things to keep in mind when making energy decisions, either for your household or for your business. The content we'll cover is intended to help you avoid common pitfalls. Then we'll shift gears from speaking more about preventative measures to discussing a few possible options for those individuals who are currently in some sort of bind or problematic situation. We'll outline a possible path forward for folks who are struggling and point you in the direction of additional resources and assistance. The last topic of the evening is where we get to transition from talking about consumer protection to talking about how we create a more positive energy future together. And at that time, we'll introduce a new, upcoming, and exciting city program called Community Choice Electricity. After our discussion of Community Choice Electricity, I'll conclude the presentation, and then we'll take a short break. We have a surprise for you all during the break. We think you'll enjoy it, and we hope you stick around. Then, after the break, we'll open up the webinar for a Q&A session. And during the Q&A session, I'll close the interpretation channels so that we have all the attendees in one space. Okay, so why does your electric account need protecting in the first place? Let's frame the problem. To understand the potential threat to your electric account, we need to understand where our electricity comes from at a basic level. Many residents receive their electricity supply from Eversource, Boston's local utility. Eversource purchases electricity on behalf of its customers and then charges its customers the cost of covering that electricity. Eversource does not make a profit off of the electricity it supplies. The other option is that a resident receives their electricity supply from a for-profit company called a competitive electric supplier. Unlike with Eversource, to be served by a competitive electric supplier, residents must sign a contract with that supplier for electricity. Competitive electric suppliers theoretically exist to give residents greater consumer choice, but they also introduce a host of potential issues, which we'll get to on the next slide. After you select your electric supplier, that electricity needs to be carried to your home or business. As the local utility, Eversource handles this job. They are the electricity distributor. It doesn't matter where you get your electricity supply from. It all goes through Eversource's poles and wires. Not only that, but Eversource reads your meter, handles grid maintenance, provides customer service, and bills you. And that last part about billing is really key. You will only ever receive one electric bill, and that bill will always be from Eversource. However, that does not mean you necessarily receive your electricity supply from Eversource. You may, but it could also come from a competitive electric supplier, as shown by the diagram. And finally, the electricity is distributed to the electricity customer, and that's you. So briefly to recap, electric customers currently have two options. They can receive their electricity supply from Eversource or from a competitive electric supplier. And then Eversource delivers that electricity to your home or business. So as I hinted at on the previous slide, residents who are approached or supplied by competitive electric suppliers have had some issues over the years. Because competitive electric suppliers want to make you their customer, they will often aggressively seek out your business. They might send marketers to knock on your door. They might call you on the phone, or they might send you mail. And so numerous complaints have been filed against these companies and the marketers they employ. On this slide, I've listed some broad categories of the types of complaints that have arisen. Some of these include the promise of savings that didn't materialize, false affiliations with the local utility, which for Boston is Eversource, harassment by marketers, poor customer service, and high termination fees. And I've listed a few other types of allegations, but I just wanted to give you sort of a sense of the problems that have arisen. And the complaints have been piling up. Since 2015, the Massachusetts Attorney General and the Department of Public Utilities have received over 3,000 complaints regarding competitive electric suppliers. And so this is a major issue. And given the significance of this issue, we're starting to see some action. The Massachusetts Attorney General has gone so far as to call for the end to all sales of these supply contracts at the residential level. Meanwhile, the Department of Public Utilities has taken a slightly different approach. They are seeking to reform the competitive electric supply marketplace in the hopes that it can better serve residents. So now I want to speak a bit about the financial costs incurred by individuals who find themselves bound by an electric supply contract. As a result of signing contracts with competitive electric suppliers, electric customers across the state have lost approximately $340 million over the course of the last 5 years. This means that if those customers had simply stayed with the local utility, there would be $340 million more in our communities right now. And what does the cost look like at the household level? Well, from 2016 to 2017, the average household paid an extra $226 for their electricity as a result of signing a contract with a competitive electric supplier. And in some cases, it was found that some households lost far more. The households that were hardest hit lost around $500 over the course of that year. And it's important to note that this issue has not been affecting everyone equally. There is strong evidence that low-income communities are being targeted. Often, the heaviest losses are sustained by the communities least able to afford them. Low-income households sign up for these contracts at a higher rate than households with higher incomes do. And that is what's shown in these two maps of Boston. We are looking at the rate at which residents sign competitive electric supply contracts based on their income level. And so the leftmost map shows the percentage of higher income households that sign these contracts. And you can see that for different neighborhoods, somewhere between 0 and 30% of customers in this income group sign contracts. And if we contrast that with the rightmost map, which shows low-income customers, we see many neighborhoods where low-income customers are signing up at rates of 30 or 40+%. And that is indicated by the deeper shades of red on the map. So given what we know about how customers tend to pay more once bound by a contract, it becomes extremely worrisome to see low-income customers signing these contracts at such high rates. And the story doesn't end with income level either. When you begin to layer on more and more demographic factors, you find that the number of households signing these contracts continues to grow. So for example, when you look at communities that have a high percentage of minority households, and here the Attorney General specifically looks at African American and Hispanic households, and then you look at communities with a high percentage of households with low English speaking proficiency, as well as immigrant and elderly communities. And finally, communities with a high percentage of low income households. You see these communities having a higher participation rate with these contracts. So the issue is compounded. And not only do residents in these communities tend to sign contracts at a higher rate, they also tend to pay more once bound by a contract. So we actually see that some suppliers are charging higher rates to households in certain communities. In fact, 2 slides ago, I mentioned a case where a household lost around $500 over the course of a year. And that figure was for a low-income household. So that concludes the first part of our discussion, where we frame the issue residents and small businesses sometimes face when signing electricity contracts. We encourage you to find a recent electric bill and see who supplies your electricity. Shown here is an example of a bill from a customer served by Eversource. You'll want to find the section of the bill that says, your electric supplier is. If you switch from Eversource to a competitive electric supplier, for your electricity, it would be reflected in this section. And so here's an example of a bill from a customer who's on competitive electric supply. This is obviously generalized, but this is what it would look like. Okay, so in this next section of the webinar, we will discuss how you might protect yourself from aggressive, deceptive, or predatory electric supply marketers. First, I want to speak about two common pitfalls one might face. The first thing to watch out for is something called an imposter scam. Imposter scams are when a marketer or scam artist pretends to be from or work with your utility. And here we have outlined two tips for you, 2 ways to avoid imposter scams. The first tip is to always decline any door-to-door offer or request to discuss your energy rate. You need to remember that Eversource will never reach out to you to discuss your electricity supply options. As I mentioned in a previous slide, Eversource does not make money off the electricity it supplies to its customers. So that's why they will never reach out to you to discuss your electricity supply options. The second tip is to call Eversource if you ever have a question or if you want to actually see if they sent someone to your door. And also, we recommend that you do not dial the phone number that the marketer provides. The second pitfall that is common is this issue called slamming. And slamming is when a marketer switches your electric supplier without your knowledge or consent. The first way to avoid this is to never provide personal or financial information to anyone without verifying their credentials first. Upon your request, a marketer must supply you with their name, photo ID, company name, and a number to call to confirm their identity. So be sure you ask for that. And tip number 2 is to guard your electric account like you would any other account information. Only provide it if you've already agreed to sign a contract and not before. These 2 steps will help you avoid slamming. And there are a few other warning signs or red flags that one should be aware of or watch out for. One of those is a threat to disconnect your power without immediate payment. That's a red flag. Also, if someone comes to you and demands payment and asks you to pay with an unusual form of payment. Aggressive door-to-door sales tactics, persistent phone calls, and marketers promising savings too good to be true. If someone behaves in any of these ways, then we advise you to proceed with caution. So up to this point, we've spoken about scams and blatantly deceptive, predatory, or aggressive sales tactics. However, even if a marketer does nothing illegal, the confusing nature of electric supply contracts alone presents a problem. Through no fault of their own, a resident could find themselves trapped in a costly contract. And so here is a fictional scenario that illustrates why an electric supply contract can be so complicated. So let's say you're an Eversource Basic Service customer, as shown by this green line. You are currently paying Eversource's winter basic service rate. A marketer comes to your door in February, offering you a lower rate than you are currently paying. The contract would start in March and run for 10 months. And the question is, should you sign that contract? Initially, you might think you're getting a good deal. I'm going to tell you that it could be more complicated than that. We need to look at how Eversource's rates change over time. Eversource's basic service rates change on January 1st and July 1st of every year. And typically, Eversource's summer rates are lower than its winter rates. So here I'm showing how Eversource's rates rise and fall with the seasons. So once Eversource's summer rates kick in on July 1st, you may actually be paying a higher rate if you sign the contract. And there's another factor. Electricity consumption tends to increase during the summer months. This is because a lot of people cool their homes with electricity in the summer. So in this scenario, the customer might actually be paying a higher rate for electricity at the same time as their consumption is spiking. And now this marketer's offer is looking even worse. And finally, after the 10-month contract expires, the customer will still be served by the competitive electric supplier unless they choose to cancel. At this point, at the end of a contract's terms, many rates can become variable and steeply increase. And if you're not paying attention, you might end up paying a lot more for your electricity. So on this slide, I've outlined a number of key questions to ask about an electric supply contract. And this shows how it can be so complicated to understand a contract fully. But like with any contract, it's important to know what you're signing. And so here are some key questions to ask. What is the length of the contract? Are there penalties involved? Is your rate going to be fixed or variable? And will the contract automatically renew? And at what rate will it renew at? And there's a number of other questions that you would want to ask a marketer about their offer to you. But here are some of the key points one should be looking for. We've spoken a bit about how to avoid unfavorable contracts altogether. But what if you're already bound by a contract? I'm going to provide a few steps you might be able to take to get out of that contract, but we can't prescribe definite solutions as everyone's situation will be different and unique. So let's say you're unhappy with your electric supplier. You can look into your options to switch back to Eversource Basic Service. And so here are 4 steps we've outlined that you could potentially take. Step 1 involves calling your supplier directly. And you can find their contact information on your electric bill. Step 2 would be to ask them if there's an early termination fee. If there's not, you're in the clear and you're free to choose another supplier. Now, if there is an early termination fee, you can ask the supplier to waive it, and that might do the trick. It's possible they will refuse, and at that point you have three options. You can ask them when your contract ends, put that date in your calendar, and cancel as soon as possible. You can cancel anyway, but recognize you will have to pay an early termination fee, or seek further assistance. And I'll speak to where you might reach out for further assistance in the next 2 slides. And finally, remember that you have 3 days after signing any contract to cancel free of charge. So one of the best resources on this issue of these contracts, is the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. And they can help with a bunch of different issues, including if you feel you've been the victim of deceptive or misleading sales practices, misleading contract terms, harassment, other violations, and they're generally there to help you. So reach out to them if you're having an issue, and I've included their contact information on the slide. You can also reach out to the Department of Public Utilities. They do handle a slightly different set of issues than the Attorney General does. Those issues include unauthorized changes to your electric account. So again, the issue of slamming that we discussed previously. If you see mysterious cancellations or termination fees, or if you're experiencing billing problems with an electric supplier. And I've also included their contact information below as well. So now we've made it to the portion of the webinar where we begin to look at what's on the horizon. Mayor Martin J. Walsh is committed to a healthy, resilient, and carbon neutral Boston. To move us toward that vision, the City of Boston will be launching a new program called Community Choice Electricity, or CCE for short. CCE will help us achieve the goals of the Imagine Boston 2030 plan and the city's climate action plan. It puts us on a course to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. This slide may look familiar. If you recall from earlier, I mentioned that residents and businesses currently have 2 options for where they get their electricity: Eversource or a competitive electric supplier. With the Community Choice Electricity Program, there will be a 3rd option available to you come February of next year. We're very excited about being able to bring this opportunity to you. Community Choice Electricity is the culmination of many years of hard work. In October of 2017, the City Council voted and passed an order authorizing the City of Boston to adopt a program such as this. As a customer of this program, the city will be working on your behalf to provide the most affordable and renewable electricity possible. And how will it do this? Well, the city will select the companies that supply electricity to the CCE program's many customers. This puts the City of Boston and all the residents and businesses that participate in the program in a position to make our own choices about our energy future, while at the same time allowing us to leverage the collective buying power of Boston's communities to get us there. By having the City of Boston assume the responsibility of deciding where and how we get electricity, we are able to democratize our energy choices. After all, we are beholden to you, the residents and the voters. Now, the Department of Public Utilities does require that I include this disclaimer on the slide. Eversource's basic service rates change twice a year or more. And the rates of the Community Choice Electricity Program may not always be lower than the basic service rate. Frankly, it's not possible for us to know Eversource's future rates. The CCE program will strive to save customers money relative to Eversource's basic service rate. However, we cannot guarantee savings. Guaranteeing savings would be an example of the sort of sketchy, dishonest behavior that we've been talking about for the last 35 minutes. And the City of Boston doesn't engage in that type of behavior. So here I outline a few key features of the program. We've discussed a few of these already, but the program harnesses the buying power of our communities. And so we anticipate around 250,000 customers in total participating in the program. And this size will allow us to secure favorable electric deals. It also allows for local control over our energy choices. And by having a municipal body, the City of Boston, administer this program, that ensures transparency and accountability. Importantly, you also do not have to sign a contract to participate in this program. So that means no penalties. It's a departure from, what we've been talking about with competitive electric suppliers, where you do have to sign a contract and there can be penalties. With CCE, there are no penalties. This is also an opt-out program, which means you will be automatically enrolled if you are an Eversource basic service customer and you choose not to opt out of the program. That being said, this program, residents can opt in or opt out of the program at any time. And finally, the program is guided by 6 principles. And I'll walk us through those on the next slide. So here are the program's principles. The CCE program will be guided by these 6 principles, and these principles reflect Mayor Walsh's goals and the values of our community. These 6 principles were developed in partnership with a working group. That working group was composed of local leaders, advocates, and residents. And so the principles are to reduce emissions, promote environmental justice, increase the amount of renewable and especially local energy, This program strengthens consumer protection by providing a third option for residents who may be struggling with a contract. And the program looks to ensure affordable and stable electric rates. And so once again, I must point out that the program cannot guarantee savings. So I want to step back and speak about this, this program using a metaphor that I hope will clarify how community choice electricity can benefit you and all of Boston. So imagine you're trying to hike to the summit of a mountain you've never been to before. And at the summit are all of the things we spoke about on the previous slide. Those include affordable electricity, renewable electricity that lowers our carbon emissions, investments in local energy production in ways that support our most disadvantaged communities. You have two ways of getting to the summit. The first option is to go it alone. But if you go it alone, you might face some unforeseen challenges. Maybe the map you brought with you is confusing and shows shortcuts that end up not being shortcuts. Maybe the trail is poorly marked or disappears in certain sections of the hike. And maybe your route is rocky or leads you past rattlesnakes or through poison ivy. Sort of some of those marketers and scammers that we've been talking about. This can be what it's like trying to sign an individual electric supply contract as a resident. There's a small chance you could get to the top quicker if you go it alone, but it's unlikely. Far more likely is that you get lost on the mountain. And so now there's a second option. You hike to the top of the mountain with a team of fellow hikers. You're hiking with experienced guides that have hiked this mountain numerous times before, and they take you on a gentle, easy path to the top. You're traveling with a group, so that provides peace of mind. And because you're able to support one another, you're able to hike to the top of the mountain quickly. And that, in a nutshell, is the difference between signing a contract with a competitive electric supplier on your own and participating in the Boston Community Choice Electricity Program. With CCE, you're traveling with a community. Your experienced guides are the City of Boston's energy experts. They understand energy markets and will work to serve your interests and the interests of all Bostonians. After all, they are public servants. Community Choice Electricity will launch February of next year. More details will be coming out about the program in the next few months. We will be holding some virtual meetings to share more details about the program and answer any questions you may have. So keep an eye out for those meetings. And in the meantime, check out our website to learn more about the program. You can also sign up to receive emails about the program by visiting that website. And finally, look at your electric bill to determine who supplies your electricity. Think about whether or not you're happy with your service and the rate you're paying. We encourage you to do this soon At the end of November, we will be sending opt-out notices to residents who are on Eversource's basic service. By being on that mailing list, that's an easy way to participate in the program. Of course, you can always join the program later on as well. It'll just require more action on your end. So now I'll wrap up this presentation with a few key takeaways. We spoke about competitive electric suppliers and how they're costing Massachusetts and Boston residents. I spoke to the unequal impact on our vulnerable communities and how they're disproportionately impacted. We spoke about protecting yourself from imposter scams, slamming, and other predatory practices. We listed a few key questions that you should ask about signing a contract before you sign anything. We spoke about how you might switch back to Eversource as your supplier, where you might reach out if you need further assistance. And we introduced the Boston Community Choice Electricity Program, which is coming soon and will be worth the wait.